What if I told you that the American government was responsible for the cocaine explosion of the 1980s? What if I told you that the American government funded, aided, abetted, and created the cocaine firestorm of the 80s that destroyed so many communities? What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Soapbox. I'm Judius Pinkston, your host and your urban historian. And remember to like and subscribe if you like what you hear. Get this message out to as many people as possible. That is what we hope for, and that is what we're doing. I'm stepping up on the soapbox. Let's get into it. What's up, everybody? This is your urban historian, Judius Pinkston, back with another episode. During the 1980s, a war was going on in two places, Nicaragua and in the Middle East, the Iran-Contra war. The Iran-Iraq war. And that Iran-Iraq war was being fought by none other than Saddam Hussein, who at the time was our ally, fighting the Ayatollah in Iran. And as you may or may not know, Iran was our sworn enemy, as they are now, rightfully so. But that's a time for another story. That's a story for another time. So during the 80s, cocaine became epidemic. It became ubiquitous. It was everywhere, all in the inner cities. It was killing everyone. And Saddam Hussein was fighting the Ayatollah, and America was backing Hussein at the time. And America had another war that it was funding in Central America, in Nicaragua to be exact. And that war was the Sandinistas against the Contra rebels. The Sandinistas was a communist socialist group that had taken over the government. And two men, one last name Blandone and the other one last name Meneses, fled the nation, fled the country. And America didn't want another any communist activity, another, you had Cuba. They did not want another communist nation in their backyard. So they funded the Contra rebels. The Contra rebels fought on our side and were funded by the CIA. The CIA was the operators that were sent to help fund and aid and train the rebels to fight the Sandinistas. And so America was fighting two wars. Congress said no more funding for the Contra rebels. The CIA went to the president, whom at that time was Ronald Reagan, the Reagan administration, and said, if we don't continue to fund the rebels, they will be slaughtered if we back out on them now. But Congress was firm, no more funding for CIA pet projects, no more funding any of these things anymore. So Reagan said, fund them any way you can. Don't let me know about it. I don't want to hear about it. So the CIA found some rockets that we had, some surplus rockets. And they found a back channel through the Israelis to sell them to Iran. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Iran's our enemy, right? Iran is our sworn enemy. But through a back channel, we sold them rockets to fund the Contra rebels. Now, I'm gonna talk about some of that other funding, but we sold rockets. And when Saddam Hussein found out that he's fighting a war and we're allies, and the United States government backdoors him, he says, I'm going to kill that effing Bush. Oh, yeah. George Bush Sr. was the director of the CIA at the time. So he said, I'm going to kill that effing Bush. So when the younger Bush, who became president, went to kill Saddam Hussein, and then he slipped and said, he tried to kill my daddy. He meant it. He meant it. Because Saddam Hussein had swore that's what he was going to do for being backdoored by the director of the CIA. And so something else that's not talked about a lot is that the other part of the funding that yielded way much more money, it yielded tons of money, and it continues till today to yield money, was the illegal importation of cocaine into America. And no, it's not imported as rocks, like some of you may think. It's powder cocaine. During that time, John DeLorean, the famous car maker, and if you're not familiar with the name John DeLorean, he's the guy who made the Back to the Future car. That's his car. Yeah, that DeLorean was caught with 300 kilos of cocaine trying to save his failing car company. But he got off. And that's a story for another time. So cocaine began to flood into America under Blandone and Meneses. Meneses was well known as early as 1976 as a well-known dope dealer. He was a well-known dope dealer. He dealt a lot of dope. And by the 80s, he was known as the king of drugs and a well-known drug trafficker by the DEA. And he was a political dissident. He settled in San Francisco, and Blandone settled in the LA area. And by that time, a little known drug had surfaced in the Bay Area. They believed that rock cocaine was created in the Bay Area by someone that had Merck. That's the Merck medical book. They had a experience using the Merck medical book and created a rock cocaine. Before that, it was smoked using ether and water, and it was called freebasing. So they would freebase. And if you don't remember, I can remember when Richard Pryor was freebasing and he caught himself on fire, freebasing. So freebasing was a big thing. And then rock cocaine came and it displaced freebasing because it was cheap, it was easy, and it only took a little cocaine to get a very, very strong high. So it displaced freebasing. So the rock cocaine was cooked with baking soda, and George Blandone was in L.A. And so Meneses got him involved in selling drugs. Blandone had a master's in marketing. Yeah, worked out really well having that master's. He put that master's of marketing to work as he sold drugs down in LA. And there was a kid during that time who was an aspiring tennis player. He wanted to be a pro tennis player. He only had one problem. He couldn't read nor write. And so he was trying to become a tennis player. And he had another talent. He was a born salesman. He could sell an ice cube to an Eskimo. Born salesman. And he was also supporting himself. He knew he wasn't going anywhere because he couldn't read nor write. He knew he wasn't going anywhere, but he was really good at tennis and loved the game. But he also had another thing that he was good at, and that was boosting. And if you're not familiar with boosting, that's just a slick way of saying he was a thief, and he boosted cars. And so he got involved in drug dealing. And by happenstance, met Blandone, Danilo Blandone. And Blandone began to sell him drugs. And that kid, you may know him by Freeway Rick Ross. Freeway Rick had met Blandone. Blandone was a CIA operative. He was a political dissident, had fled his nation because of political constraints and political strain. He fled his nation. And he didn't come back to his nation until much, much later. But he was selling drugs. And as he sold drugs, Rick Ross recorded that he took his drugs all the way to Ohio, to Cincinnati. And the only reason he did not take the East Coast is because he had a deal coming out of Miami that he would not go to the Eastern Seaboard. And so he honored that deal that he had coming out of Miami. Otherwise, he would have seeded the nation with drugs. And he had two groups that were helping him, the Crips and the Bloods. Although he was not a gang member, he was affiliated. And by the way, the reason why he became known as Freeway Rick is because he bought a mansion on Highway 101, which caused him to get attention. But again, that's a story for another day. So all of this was going on during the 80s, during the Reagan administration. And by the way, Reagan is respected and loved and is often quoted as being one of the greatest presidents that we've had. His nickname was the Great Communicator. And he was a Hollywood actor, B-level, but he was a Hollywood actor. And he became one of the top presidents. Anyway, Reagan and his administration were well aware of the illegal importation of cocaine into America to fund the Contra rebels against the Sandinistas. And so as this was going on, raging in Central America with the help of the United States, the rebels used American planes, flew those planes to Texas. Those planes never got checked, and they would truck the dope to California. Blandone and Meneses would get picked up by the DEA, and as the DEA quoted, suits would come in and say, "Give us our guys." And so they never, ever got arrested and convicted of selling drugs. And they sold the most drugs in American history when it came to cocaine. And so this was long before Mexico was a major dealer in drugs. Mexico was minor at that time. During the 70s, it moved up through Panama at that time. And so it was later when Mexico got involved. But The drugs did not move across the Mexican border because at that time it was just too hot and it was a lot easier just to truck it in. It was military and no one said a word. No one said anything while the drugs just kept flowing. And a reporter from a small newspaper, the San Jose Mercury, a reporter by the name of Gary Webb, bust the story wide open and wrote an article called Dark Alliance that told the story of the CIA involvement in the illegal importation of cocaine into America. And as you know, that cocaine flooded the inner cities. And Gary Webb, by the way, committed suicide and two shots to the head. And couldn't get a job anywhere after he bust that story wide open. And LA Times didn't do anything with the story. They didn't have the story. New York Times didn't have the story. San Francisco Chronicle didn't have the story. San Jose Mercury, and Gary paid for putting that story out there. And by the way, there used to be a website. I don't know if it still exists or not, but it was years and years ago. It was called We Believe You, Gary. But he was persecuted for putting that story out. But he was the only reporter that had balls enough to tell the truth about what the government was doing. And he paid for it, paid a dear price for that. But this is what our government was doing in the 80s. I can remember coming home from the Army and my mother telling me, because she had moved back to the hood, and she had told me, she said, it's a mess. You know, you'll see when you come home. And I came home from AIT, and as my mother picked me up and we made it back to the hood, and yeah, I'm from the hood. Yeah, I'm proud of it. The hood taught me many things that I couldn't have learned anywhere else, but I digress. Came home, we driving down the street, and I'm seeing people all over the streets like a movie, stopping the car, shaking bags, saying, hey, I got them rocks. And who wouldn't want 300% return on their dollar? Who wouldn't? What capitalist you know that wouldn't want 300% return on their dollar? And so you had these guys that didn't have a future before dope. And as one of my old buddies put it, man, I'm nothing more than a freelance pharmaceutical distributor. And so you had these guys that were just making hand over foot money, selling drugs, and nothing more than out of control capitalist. But, you know, this was the 80s, and this was supposedly one of the best presidents we had. As a matter of fact, he started his political career out in Philadelphia, Mississippi, as he launched his presidential campaign. Philadelphia, Mississippi, if you don't know the significance of that, that is where the 3 freedom riders were killed. So I want to talk about dog whistles. Again, that's a story for another time. So you had all these things converging during the 80s, the drugs, the wars, the inner city exploding, all of the death and destruction that was taking place. And whenever you have that much money exchanging hands, you always have to have weapons. So at the same time that the drugs began to flow in the 80s because of the Contra rebels fighting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, that was money flowing into America. So guns flowed in as well. So the police began to report that the Saturday night special got exchanged for the Uzi. The sawed-off shotgun got exchanged for the AK-47. And so you saw all these guns coming in and this violence. I remember in Oakland, they were talking about a kid who had got into it with somebody else and gunned him down, and he had inadvertently killed a young girl who was beloved in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood said, "We know who did it, and y'all better catch him before we do." And when the police cornered him, he spun around with two Uzis and opened up on the police, and they can do nothing but back out of there. And so this is the violence that we experienced. And the way it was handled by the police, the way it was handled by the justice system, was to penalize everybody involved. If someone was caught with crack cocaine versus regular cocaine, he got 7 times the sentence because they had these pseudoscientists, these pseudo doctors saying it was 7 times stronger. So the person got 7 times more the sentence. I had a lawyer friend who was white. She told me, "You know why that law was passed? It was passed to get you guys." And I said, "To get us?" He said, "Yeah, it was passed to get you guys." And so they were allowing the John DeLoreans who got caught with 300 keys of powder, and everybody know that every good drug dealer wants to graduate to powder and get off the street selling them rocks. And so this was the dirty game being played, such a dirty game being played at the highest seats in the land. So when the Bible talks about spiritual wickedness in high places, that's what it means. That's what it means. And with that, I'm going to get off my soapbox. This is Judius Pinkston, and you have been witness and experience another episode of the Soapbox. Peace. If you like what you hear and you want to be a guest on the show, to step up on your soapbox, please like and subscribe and reach out. And when it's your turn, step up. Stepping down off my soapbox. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.